General System of Financial Management. Rule 15. Rents of buildings and lands. Rule 15 of the General Financial Rules, GFR, 2017 deals with the rents of buildings and lands leased by the government. Rule 15 Sub-Rule 1 states that if the maintenance of a rentable building is entrusted to a civil department other than the Central Public Works Department, CPWD, then the administrator or the head of the department concerned shall be responsible for the due recovery of the rent. Explanation. If a government agency has leased a building or land and has entrusted the maintenance of the property to a department other than CPWD, then the administrator or the head of the department will be responsible for ensuring that the rent is recovered in a timely and efficient manner. They will also be responsible for ensuring that the property is maintained properly and is in good condition for the duration of the lease. Rule 15 Sub-Rule 2 states that the assessment and recovery of rent for any building that is hired out will be governed by the general rules that apply to buildings that are directly under the control of the Central Public Works Department. Explanation. The procedures for assessing and collecting rent for a building that is rented out will be similar to those used for government-owned buildings that are managed by the Central Public Works Department. This rule is intended to ensure that there is consistency in the way rent is assessed and collected for all government-owned buildings, whether they are under the direct charge of the Central Public Works Department or are being rented out to other parties. Rule 15 Sub-Rule 3 states that the specific rules and procedures for demanding and recovering rent for government buildings and lands are included in the departmental regulations of the departments that are responsible for managing those buildings. Explanation. Each department that manages government buildings and lands will have its own set of regulations that dictate how rent is to be demanded and collected from tenants. This rule emphasizes that the procedures for demanding and collecting rent may vary depending on the department and the specific building or land in question. Rule 16 Fines. Rule 16 of the General Financial Rules, GFR, 2017 pertains to fines that may be imposed and collected by an authority. Rule 16 Sub-Rule 1 states that any authority that has the power to impose and collect fines must ensure that the money collected is properly checked, recorded, and deposited into a treasury or bank account, depending on the specific requirements. Explanation. If a government authority has the power to impose a fine on an individual or organization, they must ensure that the fine is collected in full, and that the money is accurately accounted for and deposited in a designated account. This rule is in place to ensure that fines are properly collected and accounted for, and to prevent any potential misuse of public funds. It is important for government authorities to adhere to this rule to maintain transparency and accountability in their financial transactions. Rule 16 Sub-Rule 2 pertains to the refunding of fines by authorities who have been authorized to do so. The authorities must ensure that the refunds are carefully checked to prevent any double refunds of amounts of fines collected. In other words, the authorities must make sure that a fine is not refunded twice to the same person or entity. The authorities also have to ensure that refunds are not made for fines that were never actually paid into a treasury or bank. Rule 17 Miscellaneous Demands. Rule 17 of the General Financial Rules, GFR, 2017 pertains to the responsibilities of accounts officers in monitoring the realization of miscellaneous demands made by the government, which are not part of the regular revenue administration. These demands could include contributions from state governments, local funds, contractors, or other parties towards establishment charges. Explanation. The role of the accounts officers is to ensure that these demands are duly collected, accounted for, and credited to the relevant government account. They are responsible for monitoring the realization of such demands and taking necessary steps to recover any outstanding amounts. This involves maintaining accurate records of the demands made, the amounts realized, and any outstanding balances. Remission of Revenue. Rule 18T020. Rule 18 to Rule 20 of the General Financial Rules, GFR, 2017 deals with the remission of revenue. Rule 18 states that any claim to revenue cannot be waived or abandoned unless it is approved by the appropriate authority. This means that if a person or organization owes revenue to a government or other authority, they cannot simply decide not to pay it without obtaining permission from the competent authority. The competent authority is the entity that has the legal power to make decisions on matters related to revenue. Rule 19 Sub-Rule 1 states that administrators and heads of departments, except those in the Department of Posts, submit annual statements to the audit officer and the accounts officer by June 1. These statements should list any remissions of revenue and abandonment of claims to revenue that were authorized during the preceding year by competent authorities who exercised discretionary powers vested in them other than by law or rule having the force of law. However, individual remissions below ₹1,000 do not need to be included in the statements. Rule 19 Sub-Rule 2. According to this rule, for the inclusion in the statements referred to in Rule 19(1), remissions and abandonments should be classified broadly with reference to the grounds on which they were sanctioned, and a total figure should be given for each class. A brief explanation of the circumstances leading to the remission should be added for each class. This explanation will provide more context and detail about the reasons behind the remission or abandonment. For example, if a remission was granted on humanitarian grounds, the explanation should outline the specific circumstances that led to the grant of the remission. Rule 20. Departments of the central government and administrators to make rules that define remissions and abandonments of revenue for the purpose of complying with Rule 19. Departments of the central government or administrators may include details such as the criteria for granting remissions and abandonments, the limits on the amount of revenue that can be remitted or abandoned, and the process for seeking approval for remissions and abandonments. If you enjoyed the content of this video, click the subscribe button so you can receive more content like this every week. Thanks for watching.